The raven would not be still. Its talons dug through the thick leather of bronze Yohn Royce's glove, wings twitching as if the bird could feel the weight of its own message. The high hall of the Eyrie was quiet around him, a cavern of pale stone lit by thin bands of moonlight that fell from high, narrow windows. The blue and white banners of House Arryn hung heavy in the chill, their falcons motionless in the still air. A pair of young knights waited near the great doors, helms tucked under their arms, eyes fixed on the wax-sealed roll of parchment in Yohn Royce's hand. He had broken the river-stained twine himself, feeling his gut clench as he recognized the firm, slanting script of Catelyn Stark. It had been years since he had seen her face, the Tully girl who had become Eddard Stark's lady, and years again since Ned himself had ridden at Jon Arryn's side. The memory tasted like iron. He read the lines again just to be sure. Walder Frey has accepted amends. Robb will cross the twins to march west. Yet there is unease in my heart. His sons watch us like crows. The wine flows too freely. I beg you, my lords of the Vale, if you still hold any love for House Stark or House Tully, keep watch. Treachery needs only a closed door. The words were smudged in places, as if the quill had trembled in her hand, or the ink had been marred by rain or tears. Bronze Yohn's jaw clenched until the muscles in his neck ached. He had known Walder Frey in his youth, known him as a petty, spiteful creature who measured slights in decades and insults in generations. A wolf had shunned his bridge. Frey pride would not let that go. "Sire?" One of the young knights ventured, voice echoing up into the high vault. "Is it bad news?" Yohn closed his fist around the letter until the parchment crinkled. He thought of the boy king in the north, the young wolf who had broken the Lannister host in the Whispering Wood, who had ridden with grey direwolf banners streaming. Eddard Stark's son, Jon Arryn's fosterling's heir. "The worst kind," Bronze Yohn said at last. His voice sounded rough in the empty hall. "The kind that smells of both pride and fear." He looked up toward the far end of the chamber, where the simple high seat of the Lord of the Eyrie stood on its dais empty. Lysa Arryn had taken to holding court in her solar, closer to the sickly son she doted upon. Here, there were only knights, banners, and old ghosts. "Send word to Lady Anya Waynwood, Lord Belmore, Lord Redfort," he said. "Tell them Bronze Yohn Royce asks for their presence at once. No excuses, no delays, and not a whisper of this beyond their ears. Do you hear?" The young knight swallowed, cheeks pale above the line of his gorget. "At once, sire." He hurried away, boots ringing on the stone. The raven shifted again, as if eager to be free of this cold height. Bronze Yohn unlatched its leg, stripped away the last loop of parchment, and carried the bird to the window. The night wind knifed into the hall, tasting of snow and thin air. Far below, somewhere in the black, the mountains dropped away in sheer, unbroken stone. "Go on, then," Yohn muttered, releasing the raven into the sky. "You've done your duty. Let the rest of us do ours." The bird vanished into the dark, a scrap of deeper black against the moonlit peaks. Bronze Yohn watched it go, feeling the grinding of old loyalties in his chest. Jon Arryn's face, Eddard Stark's quiet eyes, the way Ned's hand had rested on his sword hilt as if it were some simple, honest thing. "Walder Frey," he murmured, "if you think to feast on wolves, you had best be ready for talons too." By the time the lords of the Vale gathered, the hour was late enough that the candles had begun to gutter, sending resin-scented smoke curling toward the rafters. Bronze Yohn had chosen a lesser chamber off the high hall rather than the solar Lady Lysa preferred. A room paneled in dark wood hung with the faded banners of minor houses long since extinguished. Felt older, quieter, less watched. Anya Waynwood arrived first, wrapped in a deep green cloak, her graying hair plaited back from a face that had never been pretty and only grown sharper with age. Behind her came Horton Redfort, jaw like the edge of a shield, his mail hauberk still on as if he'd been dragged straight from the practice yard. Belmore, Hunter, Linderly, names from old songs, all of them the bones of the Vale. They sat around the long oak table, the polished surface scarred by the nicks and cuts of generations. Between them lay maps of the Riverlands, inked lines showing roads and rivers, the crude twin-towered sketch where the green fork narrowed enough for Frey stonework to span it. Bronze Yohn smoothed Catelyn Stark's letter flat beside those lines. "Read it," he told them. Anya reached first, her fingers calloused as any man-at-arms. Her eyes moved swiftly, lips tightening. Horton Redfort joined her, his brows drawing together. Around the table, the scrape of chairs sounded as the other lords craned to see. "It is not a cry for aid," Anya Waynwood said when she had finished, voice low. "Not openly. She begs us to keep watch." Her gaze flicked to Yohn's, as if she knows what may be coming but dares not write the words. "Walder Frey is an oathbreaker in all but name," Horton Redfort growled. "Everyone knows it. The crossing stands because the Tullis and the Kings have never had the time to tear it down. But this..." He jabbed a finger at the parchment. "A king keeping faith with his own vows and a senile old spider of a lord nursing grievances? It stinks. Frey may be petty, but he is not foolish," Belmore argued. His voice lacked conviction, weighed down by the long climb and the lateness of the hour. To spill the blood of a king in his own hall would be praised in King's Landing, Anya cut in. "Do you think Tywin Lannister would not raise a cup to the man who handed him Robb Stark's crown on a platter without risking another battle?" A murmur rolled around the table, like the first low growl of thunder. "We are sworn to the Arryns," Linderly said. "Not to the Starks, not any longer. Jon Arryn is dead. The boy Robert is ailing. We have kept our swords in their scabbards through all this southern madness. War in the Riverlands, fire at the Blackwater, kings and pretenders." His gaze flicked toward the door, toward the halls beyond. "Our Lady wishes it to stay so." Bronze Yohn felt the heat rise in his chest. "Our Lady is Ned Stark's sister by marriage," he said. "Jon Arryn's widow. Robb Stark is the son of her youth's dearest friend. She sat beside Eddard in this very castle, looked out over these mountains with him. Do you truly think she wishes to see his son's head on a spike?" Anya's eyes, gray as a winter sea, met his. She did not speak, but Yohn heard the words all the same. "Lysa's fear rules her now, not her remembrance. The Vale has bled before for the Starks," Belmore said. "Robert's rebellion, Greyjoy's rebellion after that. The mountains are once more quiet. Our people have food. Our holdfasts stand untouched. If we ride to the Twins and find nothing, no treachery, no blood, what are we then? Meddlers, oathbreakers. We would ride against a man who has given no offense to us." "Walder Frey has given offense to honor," Horton Redfort snapped. "If that is nothing to you, you should hang your sword on a wall and take up trade." "Enough," Anya Waynwood said. Silence fell like a dropped cloak. "We sit here at the edge of the world," she said. "In a castle no army has ever taken. We hear the cries of wolves and lions and think ourselves above it. But the world does not stay below. War has a long reach. Ask the Riverlands what becomes of those who think themselves safe while monsters feed at their borders." Bronze Yohn felt some of the tightness ease in his shoulders. "What would you have us do?" Linderly demanded, hands splayed on the table. "Invade the Riverlands? Raise our banners without the Lady of the Eyries' leave? March on a man who may be guilty of nothing more than ill manners and a long memory?" "Not invade," Bronze Yohn said. "Watch, as Lady Catelyn asks. We send a host to the borderlands, to the foothills beyond the Bloody Gate. No banners raised, no trumpets sounding, not until we know. If all is well, we turn back. If not..." He let the thought trail away. They all knew what lay beyond it. Steel, fire, the crash of armored horses. Anya tapped the letter. "We cannot pretend we did not see this," she said. "If Robb Stark rides into a trap and we sit idle here, what will that make us?" "Safe," Belmore muttered. "Faithless," Horton said. Bronze Yohn looked around the table, seeing tired faces lined by years, by winters long survived. He saw, too, the reflections of old friendships in their eyes. Jon Arryn, Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon laughing in the snow at the Eyrie courtyard, young and fierce and sure that the world could be set right with a good sword and a loyal friend. "I will ride," Yohn said, "with or without Lady Lysa's blessing, with or without your banners beside mine. I will not have it said that the Vale sat dreaming while wolves were butchered at a feast." The words settled on the table like thrown dice. Anya Waynwood's mouth thinned. "Then you will not ride alone," she said. "Not while I draw breath." Horton Redfort nodded once, curtly. "Nor I." The others shifted, some reluctant, some grimly resolved. The choice had been made, and choices, Yohn knew, were like ravens. Once loosed, they could not be called back. The solar smelled of sweet herbs and stale air. Thick curtains had been drawn back from the arched windows to let in pale morning light. But the room still felt close, crowded with carved chairs and tapestries and the clutter of a life lived indoors. Lysa Arryn sat on a cushioned chair near the hearth, her son's thin form pressed against her breast. The boy's hair was as pale as the mountain snow, his eyelids fluttering as if chasing some dream just beyond him. His little hand twitched now and then, fingers curling against his mother's gown. Peter Baelish stood a half-step behind her, leaning on the carved back of her chair, his ringed fingers relaxed, his expression composed and mild. Only his eyes betrayed anything more than polite interest, sharp, weighing, flicking from Yohn Royce to Anya Waynwood and back again. "You presume much," Lysa said, her voice edged with the shrillness that seemed never far away now. "To call my lords to council in the dead of night, to speak of marching armies, all without my leave." "We presumed only to read a letter," Anya Waynwood replied. "From Catelyn Stark, your lady sister by marriage." Lysa's arms tightened around her son. The boy whimpered. "Cat," she said, the name turning sour on her tongue. "Cat has ever been reckless. She runs with wolves and wonders why her skirts are stained with blood. The north is lost, the Riverlands are ash. Jon warned me of this world. He kept us safe from it. Jon Arryn rode to war when it was needful," Yohn said. The words came harsher than he intended. "He took up arms against Aerys Targaryen, against Balon Greyjoy. He did not hide behind his mountain when his friends called for aid." "He did not have a son then," Lysa snapped. Her cheeks were flushed, bright against the whiteness of her skin. "He had no one who needed him. I will not let Robert be taken. I will not have him stolen from me by war and wolves and Lannisters and gods know who else. The Vale is safe. It will remain so." Peter's fingers moved, very delicately, as if soothing an invisible cat. "My lady," he murmured, voice smooth as cream. "No one suggests sending the boy to war, only that the knights of the Vale stretch their legs, so to speak. A show of strength upon our borders is sometimes enough to keep the worst of the world at bay." Yohn's eyes flicked to him. "This is not a hunt we speak of, Baelish. It is the fate of a king. Kings rise and fall," Peter said gently. "The small folk of the Vale still need bread, roads, safety. If we empty our mountains of men and find ourselves caught between lions and wolves," he spread his hands, "we may bring the very dangers we wish to avoid crashing down upon our own heads." Lysa nodded rapidly, seizing on his words. Yes, you see? Peter understands. Let the Starks manage their own calamities. They chose to crown the boy. They chose to cross the Freys once. Why should the Eyrie bleed for their pride? Yohn felt his teeth grind together. "Lady Lysa," he said, forcing an even tone, "we do not come asking you to bleed, only to permit your knights to stand watch. If no harm comes to Robb Stark, if Frey keeps his vows, then the Vale loses nothing but a few bushels of oats and some horseflesh worn thin. If we do nothing and he dies under a guest-right roof." He let the words hang. "And if by riding," Peter said softly, "we are seen to take a side we cannot later retreat from? If Walder Frey is innocent of what you fear and he cries foul to the Iron Throne? If Tywin Lannister decides that the Eyrie is no longer a neutral peak but a nest of rebels?" Lysa shuddered. "Tywin," she whispered. I will not cross Tywin. He has already taken so much from my family. From cats. She bit off the name, biting her own lip as if to catch it. Bronze Yohn took a single step forward. Behind him, he felt Horton Redfort's solid presence, Anya's cold iron stare. Lady Lysa, he said, I swore my sword to House Arryn. I will keep that oath. But I also knelt to Jon Arryn when he rode with Eddard Stark. Some vows do not end with the man. They cling to the blood. Let me ride with those who will follow me. Let us stand in the shadows near the twins. That is all I ask. Lysa shook her head, curls trembling. No, I forbid it. The Knights of the Vale will stay where they belong. Safe. Her voice rose, sharp enough to make the boy whimper again. She hugged him tighter. I am Lady of the Eyrie. I say no. Peter Baelish inclined his head, a mask of sympathetic regret on his face. You hear our lady, he said. Bronze Yohn looked at him, at the slight smirk that never entirely left the corners of his mouth, at the eyes that gleamed like coins weighing a debt. Then he bowed. As you command, my lady, he said. He straightened, turned, and walked out with his head high. Anya's boots scraped as she followed, Horton at her shoulder. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound. In the corridor beyond, beneath the unblinking eyes of carved falcons, Anya said, very quietly, Well, Bronze Yohn replied. We have her answer. Horton's hand fell briefly to the hilt of his sword, not in threat, in decision. And what of yours, Royce? He asked. Bronze Yohn looked down the long stretch of corridor toward the heart of the Eyrie, where stone and ice met sky. My answer, he said, was given when I first read that letter. The castle moved differently when orders were given in whispers instead of shouts. No trumpets sounded in the courtyard of the Eyrie. No banners were unfurled from its dizzying heights. The mountain winds carried no booming calls of "to horse" or "form ranks." Instead, there were the softer sounds of quiet preparation. The muted ring of hammers in the forge hall, the hushed murmur of grooms leading horses from their stalls, the rustle of mail shirts being lifted from pegs and settled over padded gambesons. Bronze Yohn Royce walked through the stables with his helm tucked under one arm, the runes etched into his bronze breastplate catching the lantern light. He paused by each stall, running his hand down a horse's muzzle, murmuring a word or two. These beasts had carried his house's men for generations. Broad-chested, sure-footed creatures bred for the treacherous stone paths of the Mountains of the Moon as much as for the charge. How many can we slip out before the castle starts to look empty? He asked the stablemaster, a thick-bodied man with hay in his beard and worry in his eyes. 200 without anyone above noticing their absence right away, the man replied. Another 2 if we claim they've been sent down to the gates of the moon for fresh fodder. Make it 4 and 4, Bronze Yohn said. The mountain clans have grown restless again. No one will be surprised to hear we're reinforcing the Bloody Gate. The stablemaster nodded, but his gaze flicked to the shadowed archway where the slope down to the lower gates began. And if the lady asks why so many horses are gone, tell her they've gone to pasture, Yohn said. If she wishes to walk down and count them herself, she is welcome. The jest was a grim one. Lysa Arryn had not set foot outside the Eyrie's upper levels in some time, perhaps not since Robert was born. The castle's own steep stone and dizzying drops frightened her now. In the forge hall, the air was thick with heat and the metallic tang of hot iron. Sparks leaped from every anvil. An apprentice pumped a bellows while the master armorer, bent-backed, his face a map of old burns, quenched a glowing blade in oil. The hiss sounded like a distant snake. Light work for such an hour, the armorer grunted when Bronze Yohn ducked inside. The lady has not ordered the knights to muster. The mountain clans have not asked her leave to raid our roads. Either, Bronze Yohn replied. Yet they do it all the same. Consider this a precaution. Helm as many as you can within the hour. I want no loose rivets, no split leather. From the shadows beyond the anvils, a cluster of young men watched. Squires and newly knighted sons, their faces a mixture of excitement and unease. Yohn recognized some of them. The second son of House Hunter, the nephew of Lord Redfort, a Waynwood boy with a fresh scar still pink across his cheek from a practice yard mishap. "We're really riding?" the Waynwood boy blurted as Yohn passed. I heard the lady forbid it." Yohn studied his open, earnest face. "The lady has forbidden much over these past years," he said. "She forbade the small folk from leaving their valleys when war first broke out, did she not? Yet the merchants went, and the smugglers and the ravens." "That is different," the boy insisted. "It is," Yohn agreed, "for they carry food and letters. We carry something heavier." He let his gaze rest on each of them in turn. "If any man here wishes to remain, he may. I will think no less of him. But if you ride with me, you ride knowing this, we may return to a cold welcome. Or not at all." The Redfort nephew lifted his chin. "Is it true?" he asked. "What they say in whispers, that the Freys mean to kill the king in the north under his own banner?" Yohn thought of Catelyn's letter, the cautious phrasing, the careful missing of certain words. He thought of Walder Frey's reputation, of the way men with too many sons and not enough honor sought to balance their ledgers. "I do not know," he said, "and that is why I cannot sleep." He left them then, moving back out into the courtyard. The sky above the Eyrie was a deep indigo, pricked with hard, cold stars. Somewhere far below, unseen, the world of rivers and forests and feasting halls stretched out. Here, there was only stone and sky and the thin breath of the wind. Anya Waynwood was there already, tightening the girth on her mare's saddle. She wore no jewels, only a plain steel gorget and mail, her hair braided tight. "If we are to be branded disobedient," she said without looking up, "we might as well earn it properly." Yohn snorted. "You were born disobedient, Waynwood, and you were born with a sense of duty that weighs more than that armor," she retorted. Then, more quietly, "Do you think we can reach the twins in time, Yohn? Truly?" Yohn looked westward, though there was nothing to see but the black wall of the mountains. "I do not know," he admitted. "But if we do nothing, I will see that boy's face every time I close my eyes. The young wolf, Ned's son." He settled his helm on his head, feeling the familiar weight settle onto his brow. "I would rather ride too late than not ride at all." The descent from the Eyrie was a thing to try any man's courage, even without the weight of unspoken treason on his shoulders. They went in darkness, because daylight would have drawn too many eyes to the long snake of men and horses winding down the mountain's spine. Torches flared along the narrow ledges, their yellow tongues beaten sideways by the wind. Every flame carved the riders and pack animals into leaping shapes of orange and black against the stone. "Keep them tight," Yohn called back to the column. His voice carried thin on the air. "If a man slips, do not go after him. You'll only join him on the rocks below." The path led them past the covered ways and stone guard posts that had stood since the days when the Arryn kings had first carved their Eyrie from the mountain's heart. Yohn could feel the ghost of old battles pressing around them. Times when the Vale had been besieged by dragons and usurpers and wild clans, when men had looked up at this same height and wondered if the sky could be conquered. A horse snorted behind him, hoofs scraping. He heard a muttered curse and the clatter of loose stone tumbling away into nothing. "Eyes forward," Anya Waynwood's voice snapped. "If you are afraid of heights, close your eyes and trust your beast. It is likely cleverer than you." A nervous chuckle rippled along the line, quickly swallowed. Fear and humor often walked hand in hand along such paths. Yohn did not mind. Fear kept men cautious. Only a fool rode these ledges without feeling his heart lodge in his throat with every step. They passed a place where the path narrowed so tight that the horses had to pass one by one, their riders turning sideways in the saddle to keep from scraping against the rock wall. To the outside lay nothing but air and the faint suggestion of blacker blackness where the valley floor lay leagues below. "And we do this for a boy we have never seen," murmured Horton Redfort, who rode just behind Yohn, his cloak whipping about his legs. "A lad the South calls Oathbreaker, Kinslayer, rebel. A boy who did what his honor demanded when his father's killer sat on the Iron Throne, Bronze Yohn replied. Do you fault him for that? Horton grunted. I fault him for trusting a man like Walder Frey twice. Then let us hope he does not pay for that fault with his life, Yohn said. They reached the broad shelf where the Eyrie's hanging way gave way to the steeper descent to the Gates of the Moon. Here, the wind was less fierce, the path wider. Men breathed a little easier, shoulders loosening beneath their mail. Ahead, torches marked the walls of the lower castle. The Gates of the Moon, where once Jon Arryn had held court in summer months, where Robert Baratheon had wrestled in the yard with Eddard Stark under a sky full of banners. As they approached, a horn sounded. A warning, not an alarm. Bronze Yohn raised his hand, signaling the column to slow. Stone towers loomed out of the dark, their pale faces blotting out the stars. The portcullis was half lowered, a line of guards visible beneath it. At their head stood Yohn Royce, cast in a softer mold than Bronze Yohn but bearing the same square jaw, the same broad shoulders. His cloak was thrown hastily over a night robe, his hair tousled. "Cousin," he said as Bronze Yohn rode up, voice heavy with sleep and something sharper. "The hour is ill-chosen for a hunt." "We are not hunting," Bronze Yohn said. "We are riding to war, or to stand in war's shadow at least." Nestor's gaze traveled down the line of knights, the torches, the glinting helms. "Lysa will have your head for this," he said without rancor. "Perhaps mine, if I let you pass." Bronze Yohn gave a humorless smile. "If you bar the gates against me, cousin, and Catelyn Stark's fears prove true, you will not need Lady Lysa to weigh your soul. The gods will do it for you." Nestor's jaw worked. He was Lord of the Gates in all but name, responsible for what passed into and out of the Vale. It was no small thing to turn a host loose upon the world beyond his walls. At last, he sighed. "The clans have been more restless of late," he said louder, for the benefit of his own men. "We have had reports of raids in the foothills, ambushes on the mountain roads. It is fitting that the Knights of the Vale ride to remind them why these mountains bear falcons and not goat skulls." He gestured to the men at the winch. "Open the gate." The portcullis rattled upward. The path beyond lay in deep shadow, sloping down toward the foothills where the mountains of the moon gentled into wooded ridges and, farther yet, to the rolling lands of the river valleys. As Bronze Yohn led his horse through, Nestor caught his stirrup. "Bring them back if you can," he murmured. "The boys, we are too few as it is." "I will bring back as many as the gods allow," Bronze Yohn said. "And if the gods are deaf? Then we will teach the men of the Trident what it means when the Vale is no longer silent." The foothills smelled different from the upper mountains. Less of ice and rock, more of earth and pine and the faint, distant tang of wood smoke from scattered crofts. Bronze Yohn's host made camp beneath a stand of wind-twisted trees, their branches scratching at the sky like black fingers. The fire was ringed with stones, its flames hungrily devouring the dry kindling the squires had scrounged. Shadows danced on the faces around it. Young men with too bright eyes, older men with lines cut by wind and war. Helmets sat like a ring of empty skulls on the ground. Garrett, squire to Horton Redfort, hugged his cloak tighter around himself and poked the fire with a stick. He was 15 and had never ridden farther from his home valley than the Gates of the Moon until now. His world had been narrow paths, high walls, the familiar faces of kin and neighbor. Now the land seemed to open endlessly before them, the unknown pressing in from every side. "Stop tormenting the flames, boy," Horton grumbled, though there was no real heat in it. "They never did you harm." Garrett pulled his hand back, cheeks reddening. "Sorry, sir." "Don't apologize to me," Horton said. "Apologize to the cook if you put out his fire before the oats are done." There was a low ripple of laughter, the tension eased by a hair. Across the fire, Bronze Yohn sat with Anya Waynwood, their backs against a fallen log. They spoke in low voices, the words indistinct to Garrett, but he could see the weight in their postures, the way Yohn's hand closed now and then into a fist against his knee, the way Anya's eyes narrowed when she stared westward as if willing the land itself to yield its secrets. "Do you think they know?" Garrod whispered to the knight beside him, a hunter man-at-arms with a scar along his jaw. "Know what?" the older man asked. "That we're coming," Garrod said. "The Freys, the Starks, everyone." The man-at-arms spat into the dirt. "The Freys know nothing but the tally of their own slights," he said. "The Starks know honor. That's about all I'd wager." He shrugged. "As for everyone else, the world moves whether we ride or not, boy. We've just chosen to ride with it." Garrod stared into the flame until it blurred. He knew the stories, of course. Every boy in the Vale grew up hearing of the War of the Usurper, how Robert Baratheon had swung his hammer until the dragons fell, how Jon Arryn had raised his banners, how Eddard Stark had ridden south with winter in his eyes and come back with a crown on his friend's head. But those stories had been distant, polished by time, softened by the way old men told tales. The glory highlighted, the blood sponged away. This felt different. His stomach fluttered between excitement and sickness. "What's he like?" he blurted, surprising himself. "Who?" the man-at-arms asked. "The king in the north," Garrod said. "Robb Stark. Have you seen him?" "No," said Bronze Yohn, and Garrod started, not realizing the Lord had heard. Yohn shifted, the firelight picking out the runes on his breastplate. "I have never seen him, but I have seen those who raised him. Ned Stark was no man's fool. Catelyn Tully was not blind to the world. If they made a king, I doubt they made a soft one." Garrod swallowed. "They say he wins every battle," he said, trying to keep the awe from his voice. "Battles are not war," Anya Waynwood said. "Battles are moments. War is hunger and fear and the grinding of years. A boy who has never lost may not know what truly matters yet." "And what matters?" Garrod asked before he could stop himself. Anya's eyes were very old in that moment. "Choosing which losses you can live with," she said. The night deepened around them, an enormous presence pressing in from all sides. Above, a crescent moon peered through ragged clouds. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, thin and eerie. Garrod shivered. "Do you truly think the Freys would dare it?" he asked quietly. "Murder under guest right? A king under their own roof?" Bronze Yohn looked into the fire as if he could read the future there. "I think men have done worse for less," he said. "Guest right, honor, oaths. They are walls we build to keep the dark from swallowing us. But some men like the dark. They will tear down their own walls if it means feeding their hunger." He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded parchment, turning it over in his fingers. Even in the firelight, Garrod could see the faint smear where ink had run. "We ride because a woman who has seen wars and councils and kings smelled betrayal on the air," Yohn said softly. "I have learned to trust that more than any lord's pretty words." Garrod nodded, though his mouth had gone dry. He wondered what his mother would say if she could see him now, sitting among hardened knights, listening to talk of kings and murder. He wondered if she would be proud. "Get some sleep, boy," Horton Redfort said. "We ride at dawn. The hills flatten out from here, and that is where men become careless." The fire crackled as Garrod spread his cloak on the hard ground. He lay on his back, looking up at the slice of sky framed by the trees, and tried to imagine the twins. Two towers straddling a great river, a king riding in, a feast laid out, wine flowing. It was hard to imagine blood on the tablecloth. Dawn came as a pale bruise along the eastern horizon, smearing the sky with a thin band of light that did little to soften the chill. Mist clung to the low ground, pooling in hollows so that the horses' legs disappeared into ghostly white with every step. Bronze Yohn had them form up in a shallow vale between two ridges, out of sight of any farmstead or wandering shepherd who might take alarm at the sight of armed men. The banners that would ordinarily snap above their heads. Falcons, bronze discs, trees, towers, remained furled, bound tight to their poles with leather thongs. To any distant eye, they would be no more than a column of anonymous riders. He rode to the front, his horse blowing steam, its ears flicking back and forth. Anya Waynwood and Horton Redfort flanked him, their own animals stamping impatiently. "Men of the Vale," Bronze Yohn called, his voice carrying in the thin morning air. The column stilled. Hundreds of eyes turned to him. The young and the old, the eager and the wary, the ones who had ridden to tourneys in peace and those whose only battles had been against bandits in narrow passes. All of them waited. "You were told we ride to check the mountain clans," he said. "That is true enough. There are always bandits in the foothills, and we will deal with any we find." A faint murmur quickly swallowed. "But that is not why we ride as far as we will." He let that settle a moment. "In the Riverlands, a king rides to the hall of a man who once swore him fealty," Bronze Yohn went on. "That man has reason to feel slighted. Men with old grudges can be dangerous. Guest right was made to tame such dangers. Bread and salt, shared under a roof, make all men kin for a night." He looked down the line, taking in the faces, Garrod, pale but still, the Waynwood boy with his scar, grizzled sergeants who had seen far more winters than he. "The Lady Catelyn Stark does not trust that bread," he said. "She smells poison in the feast. She has asked us quietly to watch. We have chosen to answer." A murmur rippled, louder this time. Some men shifted in their saddles. Others stared ahead, jaws hard. "I will not lie to you," Bronze Yohn said. "Our Lady in the Eyrie forbade this ride. When we return, if we return, we may not be welcomed home with open arms. Some may call us rebels, meddlers." He shrugged. "I have been called worse in my time." A few chuckles, sharp and brief, broke the tension. "What I know is this," he said. "Yohn Arryn did not raise us to sit in our high castle and watch the world burn below. He rode when duty called, even when the path was steep. Eddard Stark did the same. We ride now not because we love the Starks more than our own, but because if we stand by and let blood be spilled under guest right, if we let a king be butchered at table, then those walls of oaths and honor we all lean on will crack. And when they fall, they will bury more than wolves and Freys." He raised his sword then, the bronze runes catching the first thin light of morning. "We are not here to start a war. We are here to be its witness. If the Freys feast their king and send him home with full belly and whole skin, we will turn back and count this a hard ride and nothing more. But if they mean treachery," his voice dropped, and the chill seemed to deepen. "If they mean treachery, then the men of the Vale will be the stone they did not see falling." For a heartbeat, silence held. Then Anya Waynwood drew her own blade with a rasp of steel. "You have heard Lord Royce," she said. "If any man would turn back, do it now. No shame in it. Better an honest coward than a traitor to his own heart." No one moved. Garrod's fingers dug into his reins until his knuckles went white. He thought of his mother's face, of the narrow valley where he had grown up, of the high white walls of the Eyrie. He wondered if it would look like this one day if men like Walder Frey were allowed to do as they pleased. "Very well," Bronze Yohn said. "Then let us ride." He lowered his sword, turned his horse toward the west, and nudged it into motion. The column followed, first in creaks of leather and clink of mail, then in the heavier sound of hooves as they gained the road that would lead them down, farther and farther, toward the wide lands where great rivers flowed and old castles watched them pass. The world grew broader with every mile. The tight, confining slopes of the Vale softened into rolling hills, dotted with stunted trees and dry stone walls. The road widened enough for 3 men to ride abreast. At a crossroads marked by a leaning waystone, they passed the first true sign of the world beyond the mountains. A farmer with a cart piled high with turnips, his eyes round as saucers as the armored host flowed past him like a river of steel. He pulled his mule to the side, hat clutched in his hands. Bronze Yohn reined in briefly. "Where do you come from, friend?" he asked. The man licked his lips. "From the east, Lord. From a village near the foothills. Taking food west to sell, if there's anyone left to buy. They say the Riverlands are burned from end to end, but a man has to try." "Have you seen soldiers?" Anya Waynwood asked, her gaze sharp. "Banners? Smoke?" Smoke, the farmer said. Always smoke. But less now than before. We hear talk, though, of a young king who rides and wins wherever he goes. Of lions driven back, of Lannisters hanged from trees. He shifted nervously, and of the price that comes after. Wolves take their tithe as sure as lions. Yohn nodded. Thank you, he said, and tossed the man a coin. Buy yourself a heavier cloak. Winter will find you faster out here than in your valley. They rode on, leaving the farmer staring after them. Garrett looked back once. The man seemed very small beside his creaking cart, a speck swallowed by the gray day. How far to the twins from here? Garrett asked the hunter sergeant. Far enough, the man said. Less if we make good time. More if the roads are as bad as people say. How bad can they be? Garrett asked. The sergeant's mouth twisted. You'll see, he said. They did. By midday, they began to pass the edges of war's touch. A hamlet where half the houses stood empty, doorways yawning like broken teeth. A burned watchtower, its blackened skeleton clawing at the sky. A field where the grass grew long and lush over hummocks that might have been rocks or graves. They saw no banners, but they saw the signs of men moving in numbers. Ruts where heavy wagons had passed, a broken spear half buried in the mud, a strip of bright cloth snagged on a thorn bush. Careful, Horton Redfort murmured. We are no longer in lands that look up to the Eyrie. Here, we are strangers with heavy purses on our backs. Yohn split off riders to scout ahead, keeping the main column tight. They passed a ruined inn by a ford, its sign half burned. The painted image of a trout still showed through the soot. Tully lands, Anya said quietly. We are closer than we think. Catelyn Stark's letter burned in Yohn's thoughts. Unease in my heart. The Frey sons watch us like crows. How long ago was this place burned? Garrett asked. Hard to say, the sergeant answered. Weeks, months. War does not keep a tidy ledger. In the afternoon, they overtook a handful of refugees. A woman with a babe on her hip and 2 older children trudging at her side. A man with an empty scabbard on his belt and a limp in his step. Their clothes were stained with travel, their eyes with things they did not talk about. Yohn reined in again. Where do you go? He asked. Anywhere but here, the man said. His voice was flat with exhaustion. The lions came first, then the wolves, then men with no banners at all. There is no safety, only the road. Have you heard of the king in the north? Anya Waynwood asked, though Yohn could see she already knew the answer she dreaded. The woman laughed, a short, broken sound. Who hasn't? He rides with a dire wolf the size of a horse, they say. He breaks armies like kindling. My husband fought for him once. Her eyes flicked to the man with the limp. The wolves are no worse than the lions, but when they've passed, nothing grows where they've fought. She shifted the babe on her hip. They say he's to cross the twins again, she added, to mend some quarrel. I hope he does. Maybe then he'll ride somewhere else and leave us in peace. Yohn felt the prickle of sweat between his shoulders despite the chill. And the phrase? He asked. What do the small folks say of them? The man spat. They say Lord Walder counts every grain of salt that crosses his tables, he said. And that he remembers every face that ever looked down on him. They say he's so old he's forgotten how to die, but not how to hate. Garrett shivered. Go east, Yohn told them. There are mountains there, hard land, but fewer armies. Fewer so far, the man said, but he nodded his thanks and limped on. When they rode on, Garrett felt the world had grown heavier somehow. Every mile seemed to settle on his shoulders, the air thick with the ghosts of voices and footsteps and screams. How can anyone live like this? He asked aloud, not expecting an answer. They don't, Horton Redfort said. They endure, or they don't. That is the way of the lowborn in war. Garrett thought of his own valley, its thin soil and steep fields, its narrow safety. He wondered if it would look like this one day if men like Walder Frey were allowed to do as they pleased. Then let us give them at least one less butcher to fear, Yohn murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. They saw the twins first as a smudge on the horizon, two darker teeth against the reddening sky. As the day sank, the smudge grew into towers, square, squat, joined by a covered bridge like a stone spine stretched over the river's silver coil. The green fork flowed broad and slow beneath, catching the sunset's dying light and turning it into molten copper. From their vantage on a low ridgeline a few miles off, the Knights of the Vale watched in silence. "There," Horton Redfort said unnecessarily. "Walder Frey's pride. And his trap, if Catelyn Stark's fears are true," Anya added. They had halted in a stand of scrub that crowned the ridge, their horses held back among the sparse trees. Yohn lay on his stomach beside a patch of bracken, peering through a spyglass toward the distant towers. He could see movement on the bridge, tiny figures crossing and recrossing, carts wheeling, banners stirring faintly. Music did not carry this far, but he could imagine it. Pipes and drums and strings, loud enough to cover the sound of a bolt being drawn back, of armor being buckled under a surcoat. He swept the glass along the riverbanks. On the near side, a huddle of tents and pavilions flew banners he knew. Direwolf gray on white, the leaping trout of Tully, smaller sigils clustered beneath. Fires burned, sending up thin columns of smoke. "So he has his army with him," Horton said when Yohn passed him the glass. "They say he disbanded much of it, but that still looks a host enough to give Frey pause. Or to feed his ambition," Anya replied. "Imagine the story he could tell his craven sons. How he cut off the head of a rebellion with a single feast." Garrett lay nearby, propped on his elbows, trying to make out details with his naked eye. The towers looked immense even from here, their stone dark and forbidding. He had never seen a river so wide. "Can you see him?" Garrett asked. "The king." Yohn took the glass again, scanning. He saw a larger pavilion near the center of the camp, its sides dyed gray and white, a tall spear planted before it bearing the direwolf banner. Men moved in and out, but at this distance they were only shapes. "No," he said, "but he is there, and so are the Freys." He shifted the glass to the far bank. There, smaller camps huddled near the base of the second tower, less orderly, their fires more scattered. "Riders," Horton said, squinting westward. "See there? On the far side of the river." Yohn followed his pointing finger. Dots of movement resolved into mounted men streaming away from the castle, their course angling toward the south. "Lannisters," Garrett whispered. "Impossible to say from here," Anya said. "Frey allies, perhaps, or messengers sent to sing of a coming victory, or butchers sent to sharpen their knives," Horton muttered. Yohn's jaw tightened. The sun was slipping lower, its red deepening toward purple. Already, shadows pooled around the base of the towers, hiding whatever work might be going on there. "How long to reach them at a gallop?" he asked. "In this light," Horton considered. "An hour, perhaps, if the ground is kind. Less if we push the horses. We would come upon them at full dark, and announce our presence with the thunder of our hooves," Anya said. "If there is treachery afoot, we would not stop it by charging blind into a hall we do not know, in a castle that is not ours. We'd only add our dead to theirs." Yohn exhaled slowly. He knew she was right. A straight assault on the twins would be folly at the best of times. Walder Frey's towers were built to withstand siege and sudden attack alike, perched over the only crossing for miles. A headlong rush led by a few hundred knights, however valiant, would break like water on rock. "We did not come to storm his walls," he said. "We came to watch, to stand ready, to do what when the moment comes." Anya asked, not unkindly. Yohn looked through the glass again, his eyes tracing the sweep of the river, the open ground on their side, the narrow strip of land between the embankments and the Frey walls. "If steel is drawn inside that hall," he said, "it will spill over. Men will flee. Some will fight their way out if they can. If there are survivors, they will need a place to run to, a banner to rally around." He lowered the glass. We make ourselves that banner. And if no one comes? Horton asked. Then we ride home, and I apologize to Lysa Arryn for the trouble and pretend I have learned my lesson, Yohn said. A faint smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. And none of you will contradict me, for fear of losing your tongues. A few of the nearest men laughed quietly. The sound was small, swallowed by the vastness of the land between them and the towers. We make camp here, Yohn decided. Fires low, no singing, no trumpets, rotating watches. I want eyes on those towers all night. If anything stirs that should not, I want to know. As the knights moved to obey, Garrett lingered at the ridge's edge a moment longer, watching the twins sink into shadow. Somewhere beyond those walls, a feast was being laid, candles lit, kegs tapped. Men laughed and drank and clapped one another on the back. Perhaps, at this very instant, the king in the north was lifting a cup to his host, trusting the bread and salt to shield him. Garrett wrapped his arms around himself against a sudden, inexplicable chill. "Do you think we're in time?" he asked. Yohn did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the darkening line of the bridge, his face carved from stone. Night swallowed the last color from the world. The twins became masses of deeper darkness against the sky, their outlines picked out only by the lanterns and torches that burned along their battlements. The covered bridge was a faint, glowing line over the river, its windows leaking slivers of golden light. Every so often, a flare would brighten as a door opened, then dim again. From the ridge, the knights of the Vale watched. Their own fires were banked low, more embers than flame. Men slept in their cloaks or sat hunched over, sharing muttered words. Somewhere a horse snorted softly, the sound muffled by the thick grass. Yohn stood a little apart, at the very edge of their camp, his silhouette cut against the faint glow from below. The spyglass hung from his hand now, useless in the dark. He listened instead, to the sigh of the wind, to the distant rush of the river, to the faintest hints of something. Music? He thought he could hear it, now and then, when the wind shifted, scraps of melody carried up from the Frey halls. Pipes, a drum, the higher, thinner thread of a fiddle. It rose and fell like distant laughter, almost too faint to be real. Beside him, Anya Waynwood wrapped her cloak tighter. "If they do it," she said quietly, "how do you think it will begin?" "With a lie," Yohn said. "It usually does." "Bread and salt," Anya murmured. "Words of welcome, smiles, a song or two." "And then steel," Horton Redfort said, coming to stand on Yohn's other side. "It always comes back to steel." Garrett lingered a few paces behind them, unwilling to intrude but unable to bear the uncertainty alone. The night felt taut as a drawn bowstring. Every rustle of grass, every crackle from the embers seemed loud. "How will we know?" he asked, his voice smaller than he intended. If something happens in there, how will we know from here?" "We'll hear it," Horton said. "The gods are not so cruel as to let slaughter go unheard," Anya added. Yohn said nothing. In his mind, he saw a hall filled with men, Northmen, Riverlords, Freys, sitting shoulder to shoulder at long tables. He saw the way the Frey sons had always stood in the back of the great hall at Riverrun when he had passed through there once in his youth, eyes cold, faces tight with resentment. He imagined those faces now behind smiles. He wished suddenly that he had met Robb Stark, that he had seen the boy with his own eyes, weighed him, judged him. It felt wrong, setting so much on the chance of saving a king he knew only by letter and reputation. But he knew his father and his foster father well enough. That would have to be enough. The wind shifted again. For a moment the music grew clearer, and then, abruptly, it changed. The tune faltered, then surged into something different. A new song. Even at this distance, Yohn could hear the shape of it, the way the notes marched rather than danced. Anya stiffened. "Do you hear that?" "I hear a Lannister song," Horton said grimly. "7 hells. Even Frey would not be so bold as to..." He broke off. The wind carried something else now, a faint, distant clamor that did not belong to pipes or drums, a roar that was not the river's. Shouting, Garrett's heart slammed against his ribs. "Is that steel?" Bronze Yohn said, and there was no doubt in his voice now. "That is steel." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then Bronze Yohn's sword was in his hand, the runes catching the meager light. "To horse!" he barked. "Now! Rouse them all! If there are men fighting their way free of that butcher's hall, we will be the shield between them and the dark." The camp exploded into motion. Men leaped to their feet, fumbling for weapons and bridles. Garrett ran to his mount, fingers numb and clumsy, almost dropping the reins. Around him, knights cursed and shouted, the calm of disciplined soldiers stripped away by urgency. "Keep the banners furled," Anya called as she swung into her saddle. "We ride as ghosts until there are men to see us." The column formed in a chaos that nevertheless found its order, years of training snapping into place under the lash of need. Bronze Yohn took his place at the head, Horton and Anya flanking him, their faces set. Garrett pulled himself into his saddle, the leather creaking under him. His horse tossed its head, sensing the storm in the air. "Remember this, boy," the hunter sergeant said beside him, voice like gravel. "You wanted to know how we'd live with ourselves if we did nothing. We're about to find out how we live with what we do." Bronze Yohn raised his sword, the gesture visible even in the dimness, a dark line against the cloudy sky. "Ride!" he shouted. Hoofs thundered as the knights of the Vale poured down from the ridge, a silent storm racing toward the river, toward the glow of the twins, toward the sound of distant screams. Bronze Yohn Royce rode like the wind had its hands on his back. The ground blurred beneath his horse's pounding hooves, the ridge falling away behind them as they thundered down toward the river. The twins loomed ahead, their towers now clearly etched against the moonlit sky. Torches burned along the walls, brighter and more numerous than before, as if the castle itself had caught fire from within. Closer now, the sounds grew distinct. Screams, high and terrible, rising above the dull roar of confusion. The clash of steel on steel, a deeper boom that might have been heavy doors slamming, or tables overturned, or men crashing into one another in blind panic. "Straight for the Stark camp," Bronze Yohn shouted over his shoulder. His voice came ragged with exertion and fury. "If any man is fleeing, they'll head there first. Shields up, lances ready." The knights of the Vale tightened ranks around him, the practiced discipline of years compressing the chaos into a spear point of armored flesh. Shields came up, lances lowered, the air suddenly full of the creak of leather and the metallic whisper of blades freed fully from their scabbards. Below, at the base of the nearest tower, the Stark encampment was already aflame. Tents burned like paper, their canvas skins bellied with hot light. Shapes moved through the firelit gloom. Men running, stumbling, some with swords drawn, others unarmed. Arrows arced down from the walls. Somewhere a horn sounded, shrill and urgent. Garrett's mouth went dry. The world he had known, cold stone, quiet skies, familiar paths, fell away entirely in the face of this wild, churning bedlam. He could see men cut down as they ran, others trampled. "Sare!" he cried, not sure who he called to. "Eyes ahead!" Horton Redfort bellowed. "We're the hammer, boy, not the anvil. Let the enemy feel our weight." They hit the outer fringe of the Frey camp like a storm. Frey men-at-arms turned in shock as the Vale knights slammed into them. Most had been facing the Stark tents, bows in hand, swords drawn for butchery, not battle. The first rank vanished under the lances, bodies lifted from their feet, hurled back with the force of impact. Wood cracked, men screamed, horses screamed louder. Bronze Yohn's lance took a freckled Frey boy in the chest, driving him backward through the side of a supply wagon. The shaft shattered, splinters flying. Yohn dropped the broken length, drawing his sword in one smooth motion as his horse barreled on. "Falcon!" he roared. the old battle cry tearing from his throat, older than the Arryn falcon itself. Falcon! For the Vale! Around him, voices took up the cry. Steel flashed in the firelight. A Frey with a greasy plaited beard lunged at him, only to have his sword knocked aside and his throat opened in the same heartbeat. Garrett saw little but flashes. The spray of blood against someone's cheek, the flare of a torch knocked to the ground, the white terror of a horse's eye. He thrust with his spear almost by instinct when a shape loomed in front of him, felt the jolt as it struck home. The man he'd skewered gaped up at him in disbelief, hands pawing weakly at the shaft protruding from his belly. "I," Garrett said, and then Horton's warhorse slammed past, trampling the Frey under. "Do not look back," Horton shouted. "If they're standing, they're the enemy. If they're down, they're the gods' concern." Arrows hissed through the air. One glanced off bronze Yohn's shoulder, the point skittering across the bronze runes that wrapped his pauldron. Another took a Vale knight in the neck, sending him toppling sideways from his saddle in a spray of red. From somewhere ahead, a different cry rose, hoarser, raw with fear and fury. "Stark! To me! To me!" Bronze Yohn wheeled his horse toward the sound. The music had turned, and the world with it. One heartbeat, Robb Stark had been raising his cup to Walder Frey, forcing courtesy through gritted teeth while the old spider smirked down at him from his high seat. The next, the rains of Castamere had slithered out of the pipes, and Catelyn's fingers had dug into his arm hard enough to bruise. Robb remembered the look on her face more clearly than any sound. The way her eyes had gone flat and far away, like someone hearing a nightmare repeat itself. Then came the bolts. He never saw who loosed the first one. He heard the soft twang, felt a sharp, shocking blow that spun him, saw the feast hall explode into chaos around him as men fell with bolts in their backs, their chests, their throats. Music shrieked into panic. Frey men threw off their cloaks, shields and swords appearing as if from nothing. Something hit his shoulder. Pain flared. The world narrowed to a tunnel for a heartbeat. He stumbled, dropped to one knee, tasting blood and wine and terror. "Robb!" Catelyn's voice, raw. He forced himself upright, yanking at the bolt. It had punched through leather and mail but lodged in the meat of his shoulder. Hot blood streamed down his arm. His sword hand still closed around his hilt, fingers sticky. All around them, his men died. Small John Umber went down in a welter of Frey blades, roaring defiance until someone hamstrung him from behind. The Great John fought like a maddened bull, toppling tables, bellowing threats, arrows sprouting from his chest until one took him through the eye. A piper boy he'd shared dice with days before lay twitching on the rushes, one hand still clutching at the empty space where his cup had been. Frey men moved in, intent on finishing the work. Walder himself watched from above with a half-smile, as if it were a mummer's show staged for his amusement. Roose Bolton drifted toward him through the carnage, untouched by blood, his pale eyes indifferent. "Jaime Lannister sends his regards," he said in a voice as calm as winter snow. Robb's right arm felt heavy, the muscles screaming around the bolt. He tried to raise his sword anyway, but Catelyn was suddenly there, between him and Bolton, her hair loose, her gown torn. She had a knife at the throat of a Frey girl, the one who'd played the bride, Walder's weeping, bewildered daughter whose hand Edmure Tully had taken. "Enough!" Catelyn screamed, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. "Enough, or I'll kill her. I'll kill her. Do you hear?" The girl sobbed, eyes rolling white. Frey men hesitated, blades dripping. Even Walder leaned forward in his seat, his thin lips pressed into a line. "Let my son go," Catelyn said. Her hand did not waver. "You've done enough. You have me. Let him go." For a moment Robb thought crazily that it might work, that even Walder Frey would balk at his own granddaughter's death, that some scrap of decency still clung to the old man's heart. Walder's gaze slid to Roose. Something unspoken passed between them. "Kill her," the Lord of the Crossing said. The Frey girl shrieked. Catelyn's knife jerked. Blood spilled across the girl's throat, a hot spray that soaked Catelyn's hand. The girl crumpled, eyes glassing over. Catelyn stared at her hand as if it belonged to someone else. "Mother," Robb croaked. That was when the horn sounded, faint at first, from outside the hall, then louder, closer, a deep, resonant note that cut across the reins of Castamere like a sword through silk. Men paused, heads turned. "What is that?" someone shouted. Another horn answered, different in timbre, higher, clearer. Not Frey, not Bolton. Walder Frey's expression flickered for the first time. Outside, the clamor swelled. Over the screams and steel, Robb heard a roar of unfamiliar voices, a battle clamor he did not know. Inside the hall, confusion rippled through the Frey ranks as men shifted toward the door, some half-turned from their butchery. Roose Bolton's hand tightened on his sword hilt. The phrase he'd meant to speak, "Those damned regards," hung in the air, unfinished. The interior gatehouse of the twins burst into frantic life. Frey guards who had expected a night of easy slaughter and looting now rushed to the battlements, fumbling with bows and spears as shouts rose from the outer ward. The horns blared again, this time clearly from beyond the walls, their note carrying the strange, proud cadence of a land of high peaks and narrow passes. "Riders!" a man screamed from the wall walk. "Armored riders from the east. They're cutting through the camps." "Impossible," another snapped. "No one rides in force from the Vale. They're cowards, hiding behind their mountains." He broke off as an arrow took him through the throat, throwing him backward off the parapet. Bronze Yohn Royce had not waited to pick through the remnants of the Frey outer encampment. Once he'd smashed through the first ranks, he'd wheeled hard for the gate, knowing that every heartbeat spent among the tents was a heartbeat no one spent breaking locks and bars. The inner curtain wall of the twins reared up ahead of him, torches guttering along its top. The main gate was closed, massive oak-bound planks reinforced with iron. But the smaller postern gate that led to the riverside yard stood half open, Frey men still pouring through it to join the slaughter. "Take that gap," Bronze Yohn bellowed, pointing with his sword. "No time for banners. Break them before they can bar it." The first rank of Vale knights lowered their lances and drove straight at the postern. Frey men, expecting panicked Northmen or drunk camp followers at worst, suddenly found themselves facing a wedge of disciplined cavalry, their shields locked, their horses trained to hit like falling stones. The impact was murderous. A Frey officer had just begun to shout an order when a lancehead punched through his breastplate, lifting him off his feet and pinning him to the gatepost. The men behind him crashed into his twitching body, stumbling. Horses shouldered them aside, weight and momentum turning flesh into broken things. Garrett's world shrank to the width of the gate as his horse plunged into the press. He saw a Frey face, pale, open-mouthed, rush toward him, then vanish under his horse's hooves. The clang of his own shield being struck made his arm go numb. He thrust blindly, felt the shock of resistance, then nothing. Through. Horton roared, hammering at a man who'd gotten a spear up in time, sending the weapon skittering away. "Do not stop. If you stop, you die." The gate creaked as someone inside tried to drag it shut. Vale knights, dismounting almost as one, threw their shoulders against the wood, shoving back. It became an ugly, grunting contest of brute strength, the Freys inside straining to seal out the storm, the Vale men shoving to wedge it open. Bronze Yohn dismounted in a fluid motion, his boots hitting stone. He sheathed his sword long enough to seize the iron hasp that barred the gate from one side, muscles bunching as he heaved. "On me," he snarled. "Put your backs into it, you soft-bellied sons of Falcons." They slammed forward as one. The gate groaned, then lurched. Frey hands scrabbled against it from the far side, fingers crushed in the gap as the Vale men forced it wider. Then, with a shriek of overstressed metal, the bar inside shattered. The gate burst inward, flinging Frey men back. "Inside!" Anya Waynwood cried, sword flashing as she cut down the first man who tried to block the gap. "Into the yard! Let them feel the air of their own blood." The narrow courtyard beyond was already slick with it. A handful of Northmen fought there, pressed against the inner doors by Frey swordsmen. They turned, wild-eyed, as knights in unfamiliar armor boiled through the gate behind them. For an instant, both sides froze. The Northmen because they didn't know whether this new force was foe or friend. The Freys because they thought their night's work would go unchallenged. "Stark!" Bronze Yohn shouted, letting his voice carry. "To Stark! To the king in the north!" A tall man with tully colors spattered in red barked a laugh of sheer shock. "By the 7 bloody hells!" he gasped, then cut a Frey almost in half. "You took your time, friends." The yard erupted, between Freys turning to face the new onslaught and Northmen suddenly given breathing room. The momentum shifted in a heartbeat. Bronze Yohn's blade found gaps in cheap mail. Horton's shield rammed a man into the wall hard enough to crack bone. Anya moved like cold fire, her sword a flicker at neck height. Inside, a Northman bellowed, pointing to the inner hall doors where muffled screaming leaked out. "They've got the king. They're butchering them at table." Bronze Yohn spared a glance at the heavy doors, barred from within. "We'll need more than steel to break those," he growled. "Not steel, fire." His eyes lit on a fallen torch, guttering on the stones near spilled kegs of wine and overturned oil lamps. An idea, rough and ugly, formed as swiftly as the flame flared. Inside the hall, the killing had shifted from surprise to slaughter. The first volley of bolts had taken the seated men, the unready, the drunk. Now Frey soldiers waited among the wounded, finishing their work with short, efficient thrusts. The air stank of blood and spilled ale, the rushes squelching underfoot. The smoke from overturned braziers mingled with the reek, turning the light hazy and orange. Catelyn Stark felt as if she were moving through a nightmare she'd had once before and forgotten. Her arm shook. The knife, still slick with the Frey girl's blood, felt 10 times heavier than any sword she'd ever lifted. Her ears rang, drowning out all but the closest sounds. "Mother," Robb said again, hoarse. She turned toward him. He was swaying on his feet, the bolt in his shoulder jutting obscenely, his face white and spattered red. He had that same look Ned had worn in the gods would sometimes. Distant, as if seeing something beyond the trees. "Robb," she whispered. There was nothing she could do for the girl at her feet. There was nothing she could do for the screams that still rose from farther down the tables. But she could still stand between her son and the next blade. The Freys around them hesitated, thrown off balance by the horn blasts and the shouts outside. Some had half-turned toward the doors, uncertain. Others pressed forward, eyes hard, determined to finish what they'd begun before any interference could avail their prey. Roose Bolton remained perfectly still. The only movement in him was the slight flare of his nostrils as he drew breath. His pale eyes flicked from Robb to the door as a faint, new sound joined the others, a muffled roar, as of many voices very near, and the deeper crackle of something catching. "Open the doors!" a Frey officer yelled, panic edging his voice. "We have to secure the yard. Open the damned doors!" Another man staggered toward the bar that held the heavy doors shut, coughing. "They've broken the outer gate," he rasped. "There's riders in the yard, armored knights. Not the wolves." He never finished. A Northman who had dragged himself upright with one hand, his other hanging limp, lunged and buried a knife in the man's thigh. They went down in a tangle. "Idiots!" Walder Frey hissed from his high seat, face mottled. "Kill them. Kill them all." Catelyn's attention snagged on something else. A thin stream of smoke curling under the base of the massive doors. At first she thought it was from the braziers, but the smell was wrong, sharper, tar and pitch and burning oil. "What is that?" she murmured. The smoke thickened. Men near the doors began to cough in earnest, eyes watering. On the other side of that heavy wood, Bronze Yohn Royce's men were heaping anything that would burn. Broken benches, spilled wine-soaked straw, oil from smashed lanterns. Torches kissed it all into life. The heat began to lick at the doors, blackening the lower boards, creosote in the timbers catching with a greedy hiss. Inside, the wood creaked, Roose Bolton's eyes narrowed. For the first time, something like calculation slipped into his expression. "Fire," he said very softly. "They mean to smoke us, or to force us to choose where to stand." Catelyn looked from him to the doors and back again. Her mind, numb with horror moments before, snagged on the words and began to move. If the hall filled with smoke, the Freys would be as blinded as her son's men. But confusion was their only ally now. Anything that broke the tide, that disrupted Walder's script, might give them a chance to slip the noose. "Robb," she said again, grabbing his uninjured arm. "Listen to me. When that door opens, whether by fire or by their own hand, you run." He looked at her as if she'd suggested he sprout wings. "I will not leave you. You will do as I say," she snapped, the old Tully steel rising in her voice. "You are the king in the north. If you die here, everything dies with you. Bran, Rickon, Sansa, Arya if she still lives. The north dies here in this stinking hall." Her fingers dug into him, forcing him to focus on her. "If I must stay to hold a knife to some other girl's throat, I will. But you will run." For a heartbeat, mother and son regarded each other. Behind them, a Frey came too close. Catelyn's knife flicked out almost on its own. The man fell, clutching at a new mouth in his throat. Robb swallowed. "If we meet again," he said, "it will be in the Godswood." "If we meet again," Catelyn said, "it will be because you ran when I told you to." The doors boomed then, as something heavy struck them from the outside. Smoke belched inward around the edges, thicker now, curling in gray tongues across the ceiling. Flames began to seep through splits in the lower boards. Men shouted, some pushing toward the doors, others away. Walder Frey screamed commands that were lost in the rising pandemonium. Roose Bolton moved, not toward the doors, not toward Walder, but sideways, slipping along the wall like a shadow seeking a new master to cling to. Outside, the heat was growing fiercer. Bronze Yohn shielded his face with his forearm as sparks spat outward from the rapidly blackening doors. The pile of burning debris they'd shoved against the base roared now, the flames licking hungrily at the thick oak, the iron bands creaking as they heated. "Careful we don't roast the king we came to save," Horton Redfort muttered, sweat streaking through soot on his face. "We're not cooking him," Anya Waynwood snapped. "We're cracking the Frey shell. Once the doors weaken, they'll either throw them open to clear the smoke or die coughing. Either way, we'll be there." Around them, the yard had become a brutal close-quarters melee. Frey reinforcements kept pouring in from side passages and stairways. Armor hurriedly buckled, weapons snatched from racks. The element of surprise had faded. Now it was a contest of grit and training. Knights of the Vale fought shoulder to shoulder with Northmen who had clawed their way out of the feast or from the barracks beyond. A Manderly man-at-arms, bellied and bloody, laughed as he hacked at a Frey's arm until the hand dropped, still clutching a sword. A squire from House Hunter went down under 3 enemies, only to be hauled back to his feet by a big umber with blood in his beard and madness in his eyes. "Who in the 7 hells are you?" The umber bellowed as he split a Frey's head and turned to see Anya's blade flash. "You're too pretty for wolves." "The Vale," Anya grunted, parrying a clumsy thrust and driving her pommel into the man's jaw. "Try not to die until you've earned our trouble." Bronze Yohn stepped forward, testing the door with the flat of his blade. The wood was charred now, hot enough to scorch. He could hear coughing inside, the thud of bodies slamming into the far side. "Axes," he shouted. "Get me axes." 2 men scrambled to obey, returning with heavy woodsman's tools taken from a nearby shed. Bronze Yohn took one, feeling its weight. Not what he was accustomed to, but a blade was a blade. He swung. The impact jarred his arms to the shoulders, sending a shock through the cracks already splintering the oak. Chips flew. Smoke billowed, stinging his eyes. He swung again, and again, each blow driving the steel deeper. The heat inside hit Bronze Yohn like a fist. Smoke rolled through the hall in heavy gray curtains, blurring shapes and turning torches into smeared points of orange. The air tasted of ash and blood and something sourer, burning meat, maybe, or spilled wine gone to steam. He coughed once, harshly, then pulled the corner of his cloak up over his mouth and nose. Behind him, 2 Vale knights and a broad-shouldered Northman with a wolf's head sewn crudely on his surcoat squeezed through the gap, eyes watering. "Stay low," Bronze Yohn rasped. "Eyes sharp. We're looking for a crown, not glory." Shapes loomed through the smoke. A toppled table, a dead man sprawled across it with half his face eaten away by flame. Another corpse hung half over a bench, a bolt protruding from his neck. The stag-and-dire wolf of House Baratheon Stark lay on a banner trampled into the rushes, muddy footprints obscuring the colors. Somewhere ahead, a woman's voice shouted, hoarse and fierce, "Catelyn." Bronze Yohn moved toward the sound, stepping over bodies. A Frey soldier lunged at him from the right, coughing. Yohn's sword flashed up, knocking the blade aside, then slid through the man's ribs almost without resistance. The Frey gurgled and dropped, lost immediately in the shifting haze. "Mother!" A younger man's voice choked. "Mother, go!" Through a thinning in the smoke, Bronze Yohn saw them at last. Robb Stark stood near the center of the hall, back to a toppled table, his sword in his uninjured hand. The other arm hung at his side, blood soaking his sleeve where the bolt jutted. He was smeared with gore and soot, hair plastered to his forehead, but there was a stubborn set to his jaw that spoke of Winterfell and all the hard, cold lessons learned there. Catelyn Stark had taken up her place at his side, knife in hand, though her gown was soaked, and her face looked as ravaged as the hall. Together, they held a small pocket of survival, a knot of Tully and Northern men forming a half-ring around them, blades flashing as Frey attackers probed and fell back. Across from them, Frey soldiers regrouped, rallying around Walder's high seat. Roose Bolton stood a little apart, untouched by flame or blood, his expression unreadable as the smoke curled around him. "Pull back!" A Frey officer shouted, mask askew. "Pull them toward the door. We'll choke them in the yard." Bronze Yohn wasted no time wondering whose side any of these men were truly on. He took a breath so deep his lungs burned. "Stark!" he bellowed through the smoke. "Robb Stark, this way." Catelyn's head snapped around. Her eyes widened, searching the haze. When they found Bronze Yohn's ruined armor and the winged helms of the men behind him, disbelief flickered across her soot-stained features. "The Vale," she whispered. "You came." She did not waste words on astonishment. Her hand snagged at Robb's arm, yanking him toward the sound. "Move!" she snarled at the men around them. "Form a wedge. We have a door. Use it." Robb staggered once, then straightened, the iron in him hardening at the sight of new allies. He lifted his sword. "To me!" he shouted, voice raw but ringing. "To the king in the north. To the door." Northmen and rivermen closed ranks around him, forming a rough wedge with Catelyn at its heart. They surged forward, smashing into the Frey line that had begun to press them back. "Stop them!" Walder Frey shrieked from above. "You fools! Stop them! Roose, do something!" Roose Bolton's gaze flicked from Robb to the broken doors where shapes moved. Knights in strange armor, helms shaped like falcon wings, their cloaks marked by unfamiliar sigils. He made a small, almost imperceptible gesture, then stepped aside as a lunging Frey brushed past him to stab at a wounded Northman. The Frey's sword struck something else instead, deflected by a bronze pauldron that seemed to appear from nowhere. Bronze Yohn Royce drove his shield into the man's face, breaking his nose with an ugly crunch. The man went down. Yohn stepped into the space, his blade carving a path. "Stark!" he shouted again, this time seeing the Boy King clearly. "With me if you want to leave this cesspit alive." Robb stared at him as if trying to decide whether he was a fever dream. Then he barked a laugh that sounded half-mad. "I have no wish to die here," he croaked. "Lead on." They became a single, desperate creature, Stark and Tully, Royce and Waynwood and Redfort, driving toward the jagged maw of the shattered doors. Bronze Yohn took the point, his ruined armor a beacon in the smoke. To his right, Robb Stark fought one-handed, his blade work more efficient now, stripped of all flourish. Every cut aimed to disable, to create space, to keep the advancing Freys from closing the noose. On his other side, Anya Waynwood had wedged herself into the front rank, her smaller frame moving with lethal precision, every thrust finding a gap in mail or a joint in plate. Behind them, Catelyn and a knot of men tried to protect their backs. She had abandoned any thought of parley. The knife in her hand rose and fell without hesitation, finding kidneys, groins, soft bellies. There was no room left in her for anything but the next breath, the next step, the next man who came too close to the sun at her side. Eddard found himself in the second rank, pressed between a manderly man who stank of fish and a Vale knight with hunter antlers on his surcoat. His sword felt too light and too heavy by turns. The world had narrowed to the clang in his ears, the heat on his face, the taste of ash. "Keep moving," Horton Redfort roared from somewhere behind. "Stop and you're meat." Frey soldiers threw themselves at the knot, trying to break it apart. Some fought with disciplined hatred, their eyes cold, convinced they were stamping out a rebellion. Others looked afraid, glancing back at Walder as if hoping he might rescind this horror and let them walk away. He did not. From his high seat, the Lord of the Crossing screamed himself hoarse. "Kill the boy," he shrilled. "Kill the king. I don't care about the rest. Bring me his head." His sons and grandsons surged forward with renewed viciousness. One, a thick-shouldered man with a boil on his cheek, swung a heavy axe at Robb's wounded side. Yohn twisted, taking the blow on his shield. The impact rang all the way up his arm. "Focus, boy," he snarled at Robb. "If you die, I'll never hear the end of this." Robb snorted, a ragged sound that might have been a laugh. He sidestepped, his sword darting out to hamstring the axeman. The man toppled with a howl, tripping two more Freys. "Left!" Anya snapped, and the whole knot shifted, slamming their weight against a weaker portion of the Frey line. Men went down under boots and blades. The jagged gap in the doors loomed closer, smoke pouring through it into the cooler air beyond. An arrow hissed out of the haze. Eddard saw it only as a flicker. It would have taken Catelyn Stark in the eye if a Northman hadn't thrown himself in front of her, the shaft burying in his throat instead. He went down soundlessly, blood bubbling. Catelyn barely spared him a glance. Her eyes were fixed on the light beyond, on the faltering line of Freys between them and it. "For Bran," she whispered, words lost in the din. "For Rickon. For Ned. For the North," someone bellowed behind her. They hit the last rank of Freys like a wave breaking on rotten wood. Yohn's sword crushed a man's guard, cleaving through collarbone. Robb's blade slid under another's arm, biting into the vulnerable flesh beneath. Anya parried and riposted in a blur, leaving a line of bleeding men behind her. Then, suddenly, there was nothing in front of them but broken boards and gray air. "Out!" Yohn roared. "Move, move!" They burst through the shattered doors into the yard, stumbling over splintered planks, blinking against the relative brightness. For a moment, the cooler air felt like a benediction. Then the screams and clash of steel in the open space crashed over them. The courtyard was a cauldron. Torches blazed in sconces and fallen from brackets, casting wild shadows on the stone walls. Men fought in clumps and lines, their cries echoing between the towers. Flames licked at the edges of canvas awnings. The reek of blood out here was fresher, metallic and sharp. For a heartbeat, all eyes turned toward the shattered doors as Robb Stark staggered out, framed by the jagged maw. Soot streaked his face. Blood soaked his shoulder and side. He looked paler than the moon overhead. "There!" a Frey shrieked. "The king! Take him!" Arrows rose on the wall walks, drawn hastily. Yohn saw them, saw the way half the archers' lines of fire cut through their own men, saw their hesitation. Before they could decide, a horn sounded again, this time from the far side of the yard. A cluster of Vale knights had punched through a side gate, their arrival splitting the Frey ranks. One bore the bronze discs of House Royce. Another had the crescent and falcon of Arryn worked subtly into his gear despite Lysa's forbid dance. They slammed into the Frey flank, throwing them into confusion. "Form circle," Horton barked. "King in the middle. Shields up." Robb felt hands on him, steering him into the knot that had already begun to form. Vale shields interlocking with Stark and Tully, a rough ring bristling with spears and swords. Catelyn was at his side before he could protest, her face set in lines he'd seen once before, when she'd held the daughters of Ned's bannermen at Riverrun and told them their husbands would not be coming home. "Stand," she said simply. He stood. Arrows hissed down. A few thudded into shields. One found a gap and took a Northman in the calf. He grunted but did not fall, teeth bared as he shifted his stance. "If they all shoot," Garrett thought wildly, flattening himself behind his shield, "we'll be hedgehogs and heartbeats." They did not. Too many Freys were in the way, too many of their own kin in the yard below. Some archers loosed anyway, heedless. A curse from the wall told of friendly flesh struck. Walder Frey's fury carried down from the high balcony overlooking the yard. "Close on them," he screeched. "They're only men. Drown them in their own blood." Frey soldiers rallied, surging toward the ring from all sides. Bronze Yohn's sword rose and fell, his shield taking blow after blow. Anya at his left, Horton at his right. They became the front of a wheel that turned to meet each new rush. "Make for the river gate," Bronze Yohn snarled between clenched teeth. "If we stay here, they'll grind us down." Robb shook his head, vision swimming. "My men, die here if we waste this chance," Bronze Yohn cut in. His tone brooked no argument. "A dead king cannot avenge them. A living one can." Catelyn's hand tightened on Robb's arm. "He's right," she said. Cost her something to say it. "Do you think they'll stop killing just because you fall? Do you think your death will sate them?" Robb's jaw clenched. He swallowed whatever reply he might have made. "Toward the gate, then," he said. His voice had hardened again. "But we take whoever we can with us." Bronze Yohn's mouth twisted in something like approval. "Spoken like a man of the Vale," he said. They began to move inch by brutal inch. The ring did not break. It rolled, grinding forward over the dead. Men stepped into gaps before they fully opened, driven by discipline or sheer terror. Bronze Yohn called directions like a drill master. Left, left again, straight, using flashes of memory from his glimpse of the yard on arrival to steer them toward the riverside. Freys threw themselves at the formation, trying to pin it in place. Some died on the points of spears, others under horses' hooves as a few mounted Vale knights used the ring's outer edge as a moving bulwark. The yard rang with steel and sobs and the wet cough of dying breaths. They had nearly reached the narrower stretch of paving near the river gate when a new sound tore through the cacophony. A howl. It started low, almost below hearing, then rose into a shattering note that froze men where they stood. It reverberated off the stone towers, off the bridge, off the very water. It was a sound out of older tales than any of them had been told properly. A sound of deep forests and long winters and things with eyes that glowed in the dark. Gray wind hit the Frey flank like a living axe. The dire wolf was a nightmare of fur and teeth and blood. He burst from a side passage, fur matted, muzzle red to the eyes. Chain links clattered against the stone where they still hung from a broken ring on his collar. 2 Frey men dangled from his jaws, flung aside like dolls as he barreled toward the nearest knot of blue and gray cloaks. 7 save us, Garrett whispered, even as part of him thrilled. Freys shrieked. Some swung at the wolf in blind panic. Their blades glanced off thick fur and muscle. Gray Wind's jaws closed on a man's throat. He shook his head, and the man's scream turned into a bubbling gurgle. Another Frey's leg vanished up to the hip in those jaws, bone crunching. Gray Wind, Robb's voice cracked. The wolf's head snapped around. Through the smoke and chaos, his eyes found Robb. Something passed between man and beast in that instant. A recognition, a relief so fierce it hurt. Then Gray Wind was moving again, not away, but along the edge of the ring, tearing into frays that tried to circle behind the formation. Where his great bulk passed, enemies fell or leapt back, unwilling to come near those jaws. "Forward!" Bronze Yohn roared, seizing the moment. "While the gods sow terror for us." They surged, with grey wind savaging the flank and the Vale Knights driving the front. The pressure shifted. Freys who might have held firm wavered. Some broke and ran for the inner stairways. Others tried to stand and died for it. The river gate loomed ahead, a thick-arched opening leading to the narrow strip of land between the tower's base and the riverbank. Beyond that, the dark gleam of the Green Fork. Somewhere on the near shore, Stark tents burned. On the far bank, darkness hid whatever might still be alive. "Open that gate!" Horton roared. A handful of Northmen and Vale squires peeled from the ring long enough to fling their weight against the wooden doors. They were not barred from this side. The Freys had been too busy pulling men inward, too certain of their trap to think of prey returning like a thrown axe. The gate gave, swinging outward. "Go!" Bronze Yohn barked. "Out and down! There's cover by the river." Robb hesitated again, just a heartbeat, but his mother's hand pushed hard at his back. "Move, Robb," Catelyn said. Her voice left no room for refusal. He moved. They spilled out of the river gate like water from a breached dam. The ground fell away in a short, steep slope of churned earth and scattered stones. Men slid and stumbled, boots skidding. A few went down and were hauled up again by fists grabbing at collars and belts, the forward momentum dragging them along whether they wished it or not. Above, Frey archers at last found clear targets. Arrows hissed down, black against the starry patch of sky. One struck a Vale Knight in the back of the thigh. He pitched forward with a curse, rolling. Another took a Northman in the side, driving him to his knees. Grey wind leaped across the man's body, snarling, as if to block more shafts with his own bulk. "Shields back," Horton bellowed. "Those with shields rearguard. Faces to the castle." Knights twisted in mid-run, raising shields over those scrambling below, presenting metal to the walls. Arrows thunked into oak and iron instead of flesh. A few found gaps, but fewer than would have otherwise. At the bottom of the slope, the river waited. The Green Fork, here beneath the Twins, flowed deep and wide, its surface dark glass broken by glimmers of moonlight and sparks of reflected fire. The current tugged at the bank with insistent, greedy hands. "Boats!" Robb gasped. His breath burned in his lungs. The wound in his shoulder screamed with each jolt. We had boats." He remembered them only as an afterthought. Ferries and skiffs his men had used to move supplies across. Some might still be moored under the shadow of the bridge, out of direct sight. Bronze Yohn scanned the bank with a soldier's eye. "There," he said, pointing, to a cluster of shapes half hidden by the bridge's stone supports. Small craft bobbed there, tethered hastily. Some were already half awash, arrows sprouting from their hulls. "That will barely take 20 men," Anya said. 30 at most if we pack them." "Then we pack them," Bronze Yohn said. "The king, his mother, as many as we can cram. The rest of us swim, or find our own way across." Robb wheeled on him, incredulous. "I will not." "You will," Bronze Yohn snapped, stepping close enough that their faces were inches apart. "You will because I did not drag the Vale down from its mountains to have you cut down on a riverbank to satisfy your pride. If you want to drown, do it when your people are safe, not when they still have need of you." Catelyn did not waste breath arguing. She grabbed her son's wrist and pulled him toward the boats. "Grey wind," Robb shouted, twisting to look for his direwolf. The great beast was at the base of the slope, holding off a handful of Freys who dared to charge through the gate after them. His muzzle was a mask of blood. An arrow jutted from his shoulder, another from his haunch, but he moved as if they were bestings. "Grey wind," Robb called again. The wolf's ears pricked. He spun, barreling toward the water, bowling over a Frey who got in his way. The man's scream cut off as Grey Wind's jaws closed on his chest and tossed him aside. Arrows continued to fall. One grazed Catelyn's arm. She hissed, but did not slow. Men reached the boats and began to shove them off, some leaping in, others pushing from behind before stumbling into the water up to their waists. The river's cold bite stole breath and strength in equal measure, but fear kept legs moving. Eddard found himself at the edge, staring down at the black water. "Can you swim?" the hunter sergeant yelled in his ear.
"Yes," Eddard lied.
"Then swim, you idiot." The man shoved him forward. He went in with a splash that turned the world into shock and darkness. The cold punched the breath from his lungs. For a heartbeat, he flailed, disoriented. Then he broke the surface, sucking in air that tasted of smoke and night. Around him, men thrashed and clung to bits of broken plank, barrels, anything that would float. One of the boats, overladen, lurched dangerously as a wave caught it, but held. "Hold steady," Yohn roared from somewhere behind. "Row, damn you! Row as if the stranger himself were at your heels." In the largest of the craft, Robb sat hunched, gray wind pressed against his knees, the wolf's weight almost tipping the boat. Catelyn was at his side, one hand still white-knuckled on the hilt of her blood-slick knife, the other clutching the gunwale as if sheer grip could keep them from capsizing. Arrows still fell, but fewer now, the angle worse for the archers. A few splashed into the water nearby. One embedded itself in the boat's prow. The river grabbed them, pulled them sideways, then began to carry them toward the far bank. Robb looked back. The twins loomed above, bridges and towers outlined in firelight. The yard they'd fled was a chaos of moving shadows. Beyond the walls, on the near shore, Stark tents burned like funeral pyres, sending plumes of smoke into the night. On the walls, Walder Frey stood beside Roose Bolton, their figures tiny but unmistakable. Walder shook a fist at the fleeing boats, his mouth working furiously, though his words could not carry across the water. Roose said nothing. His pale cloak fluttered in the wind. "You'll answer for this?" Robb whispered, voice shaking from more than cold. He did not know whether he was speaking to Frey, to Bolton, to the gods, or to himself. Beside him, Catelyn stared at the burning towers with an expression carved in ice. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight we live." The boats bumped against the far bank at last, scraping stone and mud. Hands reached out from the shadows, survivors who had fled earlier, men who'd swum ahead, ghosts that proved solid when touched. They pulled Robb Stark, the king in the north, from the boat and onto the shingle, his boots slipping on wet stone. Gray wind leaped after, landing heavily, shaking water and blood from his fur. Behind them, in the river, others still struggled, men of the north of the Vale, nameless and named. Some went under and did not surface. Others clung to driftwood and emerged, gasping, crawling on hands and knees. Yohn Royce hauled himself from the water farther down, coughing, armor dragging at him like a second body. He spat river water and blood. "Count who we have," he rasped to Anya and Horton, who were already dragging men up the bank. "Then we move, before Frey finds boats of his own." Robb staggered to his feet. His shoulder felt like fire. The wound in his heart burned colder. He looked back once more at the twins, at the place that should have been his tomb, and then at the men, bloody and shivering, who had pulled him from it. "The North remembers," he said, voice roughened by smoke and grief. "And now the Vale will too." No one answered. They did not need to. The river flowed on, whispering of old wrongs and new wars yet to come.